to host Nicolas Charlotte. He's CTO of the Canoa Supply Company. I have tested Canoa a while ago, and it's such a great platform you have built. The UI, UX, and everything is up to mark. So kudos to you and the team for building such an amazing tool.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for having me. I've been seeing a lot of the podcasts you've been doing and video streams, so it's nice to be here as a guest for once.
Uh, Thanks for your time. So, Nicholas, for people who don't know you right after your college till this CTO role, can you share like three career highlights?
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny one. I studied in France and I graduated with a PhD in mathematics. So I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. And after my PhD, I got to move to London where, to pursue my research. And so I was doing still things around mathematics and medical imaging and things like that. And I think I was lacking a bit of stimulation and I started looking for other industries that could be of interest. And at that point, I was applying to a bunch of roles in the private sector. And I eventually stumbled upon this weird ad for a role at Bureau Happold, which I had no idea who they were or what they did. But it was super easy to apply. Like it was on LinkedIn, and you could just click, and it would send your LinkedIn profile to them, and that's all. That's all you had to do. No cover letter, nothing. And so I was like, okay, click apply. I got an interview. Went there, like the team, like the people, and so I was like, I have no idea what they do, but I'd give it a ride. And I stayed there for I think 5 years, and it's been really fun. And so that's how I started discovering the whole world of buildings and architecture and engineering. And I was super lucky to be at Bureau Happold in this team where there were people from very different kind of backgrounds, people with a lot of architectural knowledge and culture, and others with very strong technical skills. So it was like a constant learning, and I really had a blast. And I think it was super fun. It was super exciting. And then I was like, I'd like to work on an actual product, something that stays more than, the time of your consultancy or the time of his clients, attention span. And I joined Flux at that point, which was this, like an early version of Speckle for people who are in the industry. Like it's a data exchange between different AEC software. Um, and it's a funny story, so I tell it. I joined Flax to set up the office in London. Like they were trying to grow in England and so on. And so I joined them and was starting to, was getting ready to work for them. And I did my onboarding with them in San Francisco. And I think 3 days after, Flex was shut down and it changed into a different company that was called Helix. And I was lucky to stay there. And we were a very small team at that point. We were 5 or 6 of us. And we started from scratch doing indoor mapping with laser scanning technology. And so I was like, okay, no idea what that is, but I figured it out. And so we ended up having quite a bit of a fun ride there, where we spent a couple of years building tech around 3D scanning and how to automate this process, going from the point clouds to the BIM model. And I see now that there are some cool companies doing it, and so it's quite an exciting time for this. Back then, I think we gave it a shot, but medieval things didn't work out. And eventually, I joined Canoa as a CTO when Helix stopped. Basically, I had a bit of a gap here. It was also COVID and so on. So but eventually, Fed reached out, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a cool project. It aligns with my values, my interests, my purpose. So let's go do it." And it's been a fun 4 years, for sure.
That's you have such a like incredible journey, like from non-AC and like even at Beautiful and Helix. I'm pretty sure the people, they're amazing talent to work around. Any examples of like automations you did in processes or workflows which you can share?
Um, yeah, for sure. I mean, Yeah. I've I've never been, even when I was at Apple and I was in this team, but was like it was the early stage of Beam and Beam managers, and so like the automation was like we were doing a lot of scripting and things like
Mm.
that, but it was more to solve problems that were not available in existing software. Like we had a little crowd simulator, like that was
Mm.
getting people to move around. So, it's not necessarily optimizing a process; it's just creating like a simulation tool that doesn't really exist or exists, but it's not didn't fit our need. So it was a fun one, and then we of course did a lot of geometry like exploration, facade systems and stuff like that. But again, like it's I guess you could call it automation, but it was also, I think, it was doing two things. It was like automating the process of drawing those panels, sure, but it was also doing it in a way that is optimized. So like we were minimizing double curve panels, things like that for very complex shapes. And a human wouldn't necessarily be able to do that because like thinking how you're going to split the surface into like single curve panels um, is actually not something you can do in your head.
Mm.
So, or you cannot necessarily draw it either. You cannot like start splitting things with curves or like it's not how you do it. You have to come up with a way to explode with panels into things that are single curved and not double curved. So, so I think along my career, it's always been a bit like that. Like the automation I always thought about automation like with also the question of what can it do that like a human wouldn't be able to do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
cool, you automate a process, the user can click a button and everything happens magically. But I was always more curious about like what can we do with computers that also allow like people to not to also do things that they couldn't be doing. Like, at Canoa, we've been talking about automation since day one in multiple aspects. And so we're doing floor planning. So we have a sort of software to do floor plan, 2D design with furniture. And here, like, there is an obvious, like, objective for automation, which is like create a whole floor plan for me, these kind of things. And we've always, like, for the last 4 years, we've probably brought up the idea a couple of times a year.
Mm.
Which, like, what would it take to get, from a prompt to a layout or things like that. And we never really fully went for it because like our users actually want to like it's not the action of drawing or laying out a floor plan is not necessarily the thing that is time consuming for them. Like
Mm.
discovering products, finding information, like finding things that go well together, getting a full specification, getting a price, getting lead time, like getting furniture information is actually where they get a lot of friction. um, and then beyond that it's like doing the putting an order together, like doing all the process of aggregating this data and then sending it to somebody that can actually build it. And then there is a bit of manual back and forth with that person, which like is what it is because they are like, we don't have this color but we have that one, or like the lead time is not the one we gave you, it's a different one.
Mm.
And like this like this is human process that happens. And then same thing with the client, where it's like the client wants this thing delivered, they want somebody on site, and here you can't really automate that part either. And but yeah, what we try to do is really to like make the data discovery or like data exploration a lot easier. So it's not necessarily like replacing clicks or removing clicks for user directly, like we're not placing blocks on the screen for them. It's more we're trying to give them information so that like they don't have to go open a new tab, do a Google search, go like on other software. um, and so that's another example of like trying to do something with what you could call automation or data practices that allows users to do things that they wouldn't be necessarily doing, or like it would take a long time for them to be able to do something like that.
It's quite interesting. And before we move on to Canoa, I want to know what has been your favorite memory of London and your favorite building structure.
I love the walkie-talkie. Like, I don't know if you know this building. It's this
Yeah.
one. It goes out.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think it's only one side. It's concave in like on one facade, and when you're at the bottom, like I think it's kind of chunky, right? It's a bit of a weird shape, but when you're at the base and you look up, they have these fins that go up along the facade, like for the shade, and you can see the whole curvature of the building coming out, and it's actually quite nice. And you can go to the top. There is a public garden up there with great views to London. It's a whole like public garden with trees and plants, and it's a bit of a tropical forest kind of feeling. Um, so I keep some good memories from there. Like I went up this building a few times. So it's not necessarily the prettiest, but it's the one that I enjoyed like the most, I would say.
I see. Yeah, I was in London for 10 days in November. It's like the skyline, and especially that stands out. It's definitely a hallmark.
Yeah,
And
well, there's of course the Shard. There are a few more iconic buildings, but for me personally, this one has like more of a history.
mhm. And Nicholas, what do you like? Even like in structural engineering, there's a lot of like geometry optimization, parametric design, and it involves good amount of mathematics. So, how has been your like trade-off of like mathematics, AEC, software development, and like what has been like constant source of motivation and learning throughout this years?
Yeah, so I think you're putting a finger on like what allowed me to first come in this field and then evolve in different like roles without like having to learn too much every time. All the roles I've had have required some level of mathematical understanding. So when I was at Bureau Happold, it was a lot of simulations, like energy simulations or geometry, things like that, which for me were very familiar as part of my training. So the thing I was missing was the culture, the know-how, the what matters, what doesn't, all of those things that make engineering, and these are the things I learned there. And but then when I was doing mathematics again, it was like a very applied kind of mathematics. So I was actually programming probably every day. Like it was, we were writing things on paper, but then had to run simulations to verify that certain things were accurate or like to actually show what it means, stuff like that. So it was, I've been also programming for during my whole training and
Mm.
early career. And and I think that's been the anchor to my all my roles. Like whenever there is along the years, I've also started doing a lot more of deep learning and machine learning as I went. And again, there is a strong mathematical foundation. So the things you don't know is how to use the specific like software libraries and things like that. Like, I didn't know how to use PyTorch or what, fine tuning means, or like some of the specific things that are related to deep learning are. But this, you can pick it up like very fast if you know like what optimization means, what is the
Mm.
process of like learning. And funnily enough, I actually programmed my first neural network while I was at uni. It's just not.
Oh,
It was in 2008, and it wasn't a thing. It was like this super obscure thing that it hadn't really picked up yet. It wasn't mainstream at all. And one of our assignments was to like take this neural network that would recognize digits. And I didn't think about it for like 5 more years. For the next 10 years, I completely forgot about it until I joined Helix, and then I started like getting back into it for real. But again, like I could I could train myself or educate myself because I had this foundation of like, looking at equations. You can read all the math. There is no program around that, and that's definitely been super helpful.
yeah, that's super interesting. Uh,
It's also abstract when you're in school. You're like, why would I learn this, right? I was passionate, so I didn't care. I liked it, but I can see how it's not very practical. Like a lot of my friends were like, "Why are we learning this? Why can't we just ask a computer to do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know." And years later, you realize it's allowing you to like look at different problems without having to with a solid base, basically with a solid foundation.
yeah, just a decade later, everyone is learning it.
Yeah.
I see. And can you share the story of how Fed discovered you? What was the initial pitch? How much time it took to make the first MVP?
Yeah, for sure. So after Helix, I went onto this crazy journey with a friend of mine that was working at Helix. We were like, okay, let's build a 3D deep learning framework. And I think we chatted at that point.
Yes.
Um, and so I was with Thomas, who is now like working for Lightning AI, an AI company. And we're like, okay, let's build a framework around 3D deep learning or deep learning for 3D data because there wasn't like a lot of
Mm.
unified good practices. So people were doing things, but not necessarily like in a very unified way, like you can see in images, like an image for machine learning. Like 5 years ago, it was super mainstream. Everybody knew what they were doing. You had plenty of examples. But for 3D data, it was really hard. You had to really know what you were doing to be able to start. Um, and so we went on this journey. I started making some money out of some consulting contract. Thomas went on his own. He started his new job, but then like I kept going, and it was working fairly well. I was thinking about hiring people because I had too much work for myself. Um, it was really going super well, and I enjoyed like the the stimulation, like the scientific aspect of it. But I didn't necessarily enjoy the like what we were doing.
Mm.
It didn't have a big impact on society. Like it was, I don't know, I didn't have a motivation. It didn't necessarily touch my values or my purpose or anything like that. And so was kind of keen because it was a good business, but then, or like, 3D was blowing up. So it was like, you go in 3D, you're going to be solid for the rest of your life. It's for sure. But like, I was definitely missing a bit of like, why am I doing this sort of thing? And and at that point, Fed reached out on Twitter, on X, which was Twitter, being like, "Hey, like we should chat." We got in touch via Dale. I don't know if you've met Dale Zidantino. I think he works for Cop AI now. And anyway, we knew each other. He knew Fed. Like he put us in touch, and we ended up chatting. And Fed was super transparent with the business plan, with where he was going, with the mission, and it was like the whole philosophy around the team. A lot about it was around transparency and empowerment, and like we had a very strong sustainability mission as well, and like all of those things aligned with what I was missing with my current venture. And at the same time, I would be coming as a CTO, so I was also like getting the technical aspect of what I wanted to do. And the initial pitch was like, we're going to figure out like we're going to really facilitate the transaction of furniture. Like we're going to make it easier for people to buy or to fill a whole furniture, like a whole space with furniture. And we're going to do it in such a way that promotes reuse and secondhand and
Mm.
circularity. So that was the whole idea from day one. Like it was, how can we reduce waste in the furniture industry? Um, And Fed was really transparent. He was like, I don't know what we do, but that's what I want to get to. Like, I don't know what we will build, but that's what I want to get to. Like, if we get to that with software, great. If we get to that with a service business, that's a great, but fine. We'll go through this. Um, all that matters is this core mission. And I was like, yeah, sounds good. And so from there on, like Fed already had an MVP, like he had built something with no code tools, and he was also already having people on the platform. It wasn't a very strong selling point for me, having been through Helix, which and Flex, which were like amazing tech, but with very low usage. I was like,
Mm.
having a founder that is very focused on getting usage like straight away and business straight away was definitely interesting for me. So yeah, we had an MVP straight away. It just,
Oh, I see. Eh,
this MVP, we messaged it, we've like evolved it, we changed it until it
yeah.
became the platform we have today.
Means- And how much time it took from like migrating from that no code MVP to platform and
We've
uh,
had it for probably a couple of years in some aspect, in one
mm,
aspect of it. Like it was a weird, like part of our app is a 2D floor planning tool, which
mm-hmm.
you cannot do with no code. Like it's a proper canvas-based, drafting tool. This you can't do it with no code. So like we're having our own native technology for that with JavaScript and so on. And then we had this other platform that was hosting like catalog data for products. And so that's how we make the split. Like we were like, catalog data for products, that's fine. We can have no code. It's very like it's just a list of products that you want to display. And then on the other side, it's a full blown like super interactive tool. And we managed this like boundary like that for some time. And I think 2 years in, we completely ingested like the no code app and we shut it down and we
Mm.
stayed with only the JavaScript version. I think it's amazing to get like the no code aspect was amazing to get started, but as soon as you reach a certain level of complexity, then the whole thing is really hard to work with and sort of breaks down. And there are plenty of things with code that are great. Like you can have tests, you know exactly what has changed from the previous version, and like you can roll back easily, and there are plenty of processes around it. With no code, it's not necessarily as robust, or like it's not built for the same purpose. It's not built for production or for multiple people collaborating at the same time. Like things get harder as you increase the complexity of your software. But it was a great way to explore ideas initially. Like somebody could slam an interface together and like put it out there in probably a week and have some good feedback about it.
Nice. And building an web-based app is like a different level of optimization of, especially you have like infinite canvas, how many products to load, like memory wise, some web GPU or web GL
Yeah,
optimization. Can you share stories on how one should think about scalable apps on 2D base?
yeah. um I mean, okay, I think you're talking about like what I'm hearing is like we're working on this 2D canvas, and I guess you could think that the holy grail is Figma or something like that, which you
Hmm.
can dump thousands of images in there and it would still work. Or you can
Yes.
draw like thousands of lines and it would still work. So I think it's a journey. Like reality is, first time I started, I was using this 100%, like it was pure JavaScript library, and but I found online to do the 2D graphics, and like I realized it was getting bloated after you placed 1,000 like blocks um, of like different pieces of furniture, which is kind of a lot, but not a lot at the same time. And so we ditched it. We moved to a WebGL based framework, which kind of solved a lot of these issues. And we were good for like a good amount. And then we you could grow floor plans to scale, and like we started having less and less of a scalability issue until we started introducing again more complexity. Like we added support for like stronger and stronger support for images. So now
Mm.
you could just jump images, crop them, scale them, like do all kinds of manipulation with them. And that introduces again another layer of like optimization, because you need to be smart about not rendering everything all the time, otherwise your whole thing just becomes slow. And so we started adding optimization for that, and like it's a journey. And then we realized from time to time we have React creeping in and being a bit inefficient. And so we have to go fix that as well. It's a bit of an infinite like stream. You fix one thing and suddenly a new problem appears, and it wasn't visible before because it was hidden behind this first initial problem you had. So yeah, I would say scalability is a journey, and you take it one step at a time. You make sure you don't break the current yeah the current like state you have. But it's also a tricky one to test, because some like some performance issues you might have are only happening in specific like floor plans that either have a lot of super high res images. Fair enough,
Mm.
it's a use case, or like um, super high res images that are all of the same size, or like things are, or people open like multiple tabs at the same time, or like do things that you didn't necessarily think about. You don't test every time because like we have certain bandwidth for testing, and so sometimes it's a combination of multiple things happening at the same time that make your app slow or things like that. And those are the hardest. Like keeping good performance on, like, you have a lot of objects, they all render, that's fairly fine. It's more like when people get in states that you didn't test, you might end up like having a bug or something that makes the app a bit slow and responsive. Um, and I feel like that's kind of hard to track down and like keep up with.
But like as you were describing, there were several challenges which you overcome, and like either
Every day.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a constant. Like it's constantly because you fix something and then suddenly you can do more, and then what you've done is you've just pushed the boundary a bit further. And so if you don't introduce new features, that's fine. You can keep pushing the boundary, but like we are also a platform that evolves. Every week we have a new release with new functionality. Sometimes it doesn't impact the performance at all. Sometimes it does. Like we release this new functionality that allows you to create like a schedule of goods based on certain zones that you can draw on your floor plan, and it's creating a table with a bunch of summaries and statistics about it and stuff. And for your thing to work, you need to know which objects are in which part of your layout. And originally, it wasn't a big deal for us because like that's you don't need to keep track of it. But now, as soon as you drag, you need to always update with all of those things in real time. Um, and now you have a new performance issue because you need to go through like your 10,000 products that are placed, plus like all your zones, all your different geographic areas that are drawn by user, computes what is inside what, and update all your quantities of everything. And again, like this, you have to maybe change the logic you had before and add some optimization on top so that it's performant again. I think if you want to, like, you could go from the beginning and say, okay, we're going to make something super scalable, super performant, but like, we wouldn't have a product we have today. We would have a much more basic,
Mm,
very fast for sure, but like, you wouldn't have a lot of additional functionality that we've built on that. So I think it's also another way of looking at it. Like, it's a trade-off between exploring and moving faster or moving slower, but having a much better performant product. Like you could put a stronger emphasis than we have on performance um, and like you would have less time and it would be harder to build new functionality because you always have to be super careful. So it's really a trade-off, and at our stage it still makes sense to like move a bit faster, even if we're not to the Figma level of performance, but eventually we'll catch up.
nice. And do you have any like bug story, or like in React sometimes like there was one time when I had like memory leak and the app was like, oh, what's going on, and the states were not synced. So any like interesting story of bug you overcame or something?
When it goes bad, you mean?
Yeah, goes back, or technical bug or something got stuck.
I think it happened to us yesterday. Yeah, we realized we had a memory leak, which means that basically you're under certain scenarios, the computer memory was growing and growing and growing, and it's like, and then eventually your computer crashes. But it takes a long time. Like it doesn't happen straight away, so it's hard to track down.
Mm,
And so we had that, I think, yesterday, where like the computer shuts down, and you're like, "What did I do?" And you realize, you have a memory leak, and so at that point it's like scrambling to find the source, to like do whatever you need to do to fix the issue, push a patch, like fix the app for everyone else, and then buy yourself a bit more time to do a proper like, okay, let's
mm.
put this thing to bed forever. And so I had one of those yesterday. So yeah, so it happens. It doesn't happen often. It probably happens once every 6 months or a year. Usually it happens when I'm away, which
And you're like, suddenly you are on a break, and then like, okay, we
yeah,
have a crisis, come on. Production, we have to fix it.
yeah, one. I think it was the first one that happened to us, like the first real outage where the app. This one was way worse. Like the whole app wasn't accessible because we messed up some DNS settings or something.
Mm,
It was a classic. Um, Now we're much better with it, but initially we had a few issues with routing. Like you would go to the app and it would show nothing. just because we misconfigured some sort of like network settings and things like that. And it happened to me when I was doing ice climbing in Scotland. I was like, I'm not
Oh.
in a position to fix any. Uh,
Oh.
anyway, but it's and it happened a few times when I was like in sort of remote places. I'm not often in remote places, but it happens, and yeah,
So,
but it's good to
so-
have also a team that can like be here and fix those things. It's just that at our scale, the CTO still owns a lot of things, but
mm,
are you do them once a year sort of thing, and you don't want to like you don't need to share all of those things with everybody else. But yeah, there's definitely been a few.
yeah. So Fed is always scared. Okay, Nicholas is
Yeah,
going on a remote trip.
yeah,
Uh, fingers crossed. I,
yeah. No, it's much better. We've reached a certain stability, and it's really in the early days that you have these things happen a bit more. But yeah,
have you considered using Rust? Have you seen like Rust Wasm base is also getting more performant on the browser? Any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, but not really. Like I think I went. So I started as a. I'll tell you why. I started as a C++ developer. So I was doing a lot of low-level code, and then I think one day I was working on this app. It was a mix of C++ and Python, and it was nice because you could get the performance out of C++, and then the Python was doing just the high-level interface for. And so you can go fast in certain things, but then you go slower when it's about performance. And I think what I got out of it is that like if you have a lot of data exchange between the two sides, it's actually really hard because the bottleneck is not the CPU like
Mm,
running things. It's more which is faster in Rust or in languages like that. It's more of a data exchange layer is actually really hard to get right, or it could be slow, or like um, is a hard bit. Like you have to think carefully about where you keep the data, meaning that most of the data should really be in Rust or like in the native language or like the the compiled language. But then it means that your higher level language is not as useful because it doesn't necessarily have access to the data. So like it means that really most of the work you do is in this like native language, and it means that you're kind of slower. I I don't think anybody would argue with that. Like it takes more time to develop in Rust than it takes in JavaScript or in Python, and also you would find fewer people that are able to do it well. Like doing it,
mm,
you can probably find people, but it's not as somebody. If you want to get the performance, you probably need to get somebody that is actually skilled at it, that knows how to use it, what it's good at, which is not very common. Like you start narrowing the scope of who you can hire. And for me, as a CTO in a startup, it's really important I keep my talent pool as big as I can because it's already hard enough to hire in startups. So if you also make it harder by narrowing your technology, like it's not obvious to me. Um, and so far, really, the bottlenecks haven't been that we use JavaScript. They've been that we haven't been smart enough with certain things. Um,
mm.
and it would have been the same issue with Rust. Like
But that's a great insight, like regarding the data exchange and
yeah, it's
you know.
it's I've seen it happening so many times, and I know people have made the decision differently. And as soon as you know the trade-offs and you're comfortable with your decision, like it's totally fine. But like, yeah, I think I'm not convinced yet that like I don't think Canoa would be more performant if we had
Mm,
written the whole thing in Rest. Let me put it that way. I don't think it would be more performant due to the core of the work we do, how we operate, the sort of libraries we use. Under the hood, it's all WebGL. So the only thing that we change is how we convert like the data we get from the server to actually points in the screen, which is all done in JavaScript. Could be done in Rust, I guess. But it's not our bottleneck today. That's not where the app is slow. So it's like, you know, I don't know if for Canoa it would have made sense at all. Again, considering that you're definitely paying an extra cost for hiring, for like how much time it takes to develop things, how much time it takes to ship, like everything is a bit slower. So, you know, if you're paying that price, you have to know why, I would say. You know, having said that, Rust is a super exciting language. I tinkered with it a few times, and it's fun, and it's always fun to learn a new language, and keeps you curious and moving forward. It has a lot of traction in the Python community as well. Like I'm sort of sitting between JavaScript and Python right now, and um, I think in both communities, JavaScript for front end and Python for more back end processes, it has a lot of traction. So you know, maybe one day I'll make a different decision. But today
Yeah.
I'm happy with the one I did.
Yeah, I think right now best of both world is, as you said, like JavaScript and Python. I also totally believe. Can you walk us through how a week in your life looks like as a CTO?
How?
Like
Sorry.
in term, like a week in your life, like how
Oh,
do
yeah.
you divide
Um,
time, team, meetings,
so
everything?
it's changed. Like since at Canoa, we've had multiple phases. We grew a bit, we narrowed, we decreased our size a bit, but like I've always done. I think most of the time I spend at least a good 50% of my week actually coding. There hasn't
Mm.
been a time at Canoa where I didn't code at all, where I was just a manager. This never happened. When we're hiring, like you know, a good 20% of a week or 30% is spent either looking for people, going through resumes, interviewing, all these kind of things. But those are usually short period of times, like they last for 1 or 2 months. I mean, short, relatively short. Um, but outside of them, yeah, I would say I have a good 50% on coding. I do a lot of like coordination. So you know, meeting with product, meeting with marketing, meeting with leadership group, to figure out where we're going, what's the strategy. Um, so that's also a decent amount of work, amount of time, and then of course with a team to solve technical challenges, write technical document, technical scopes for new projects. You know, do a lot of code reviews. Um, so so yeah, I think outside of this core coding time, there are a lot of like little things, but I also do. But yeah, again depends. Like some weeks are really heavy on coding, and others are a bit less because you have other things coming in the way. But I've always kept time for coding.
What has been your proudest moment in the Canoa journey?
Oh, I don't know. There are plenty. Um, I It's a tough one. I think that my best moments are when you see people in the wild just using your tech and like doing all the things you've thought it should be good at doing, and they just
Mm.
do it right. You know, they they are super efficient. They know the shortcuts you have put in there, or like all the little UX improvements you've done, and you can like sometimes we get recordings from people that they send us and things like that, and you're like, okay, this person definitely gets it.
Mm.
That's extremely satisfying because you're like, okay, you know, sometimes people are not super happy because there is a bug or like they don't understand how to do something or like um, you know, there are many reasons or they don't have a feature they would like to have, and so you get a lot of those, and then sometimes you just get those that like just get it, use it for what it's good at, and it's perfect. So those are my best moments here. It's like seeing that all the work that the team has put together is coming to like is actually what some people really need, and um, they can make it shine really.
I see. How can one prepare or from software developer to CTO role? What are the skills they need to learn?
I think so. In my opinion, there are multiple layers. Like you sort of need to be good at your craft. Like I think you need to first refine your engineering skills, so that you can be relatively fast at that, and um, being good for record reviews, being good for setting standards for the team. Otherwise, it's kind of hard. And again, like, I'm talking for CTO for a startup, right? It's a specific situation.
Hmm.
You're more a person that is going to scale a team, grow a team, and then help them get together. And like, when you're doing this, you're setting a lot of standards, you're defining what's good practice and things like that. So that's why, like, I think a foundation is like, you have to be a good engineer. It's probably important for you to be curious and have seen a few things in your career, like, experimented with a few techs, because you don't know what your startup is going to throw at you. You start with an idea, but it might not be that. So you also have to be quite, like, malleable as a person, and happy to take on like different technology, different challenges. Like for me, in early days, I was like, we have this no code platform and this JavaScript worm, but we had to make live together. And you could be like, no, I don't want to hear about no code, we throw it away. That could be a decision, because you don't feel comfortable with having this mixed system, which honestly is a pain, but like also has a lot of advantage. And so as a CTO, you have to feel comfortable, like, opening your mind to having this sort of mixed systems, doing a bit of research to get an opinion about it, things like that. So that's really on the technical aspect. It's like being good at your craft, but also being good at learning new things, because you will have to learn new things. And then as the team grows, you also have to be a good manager, like, um, because you're probably the only manager, at least in the early days. And so a lot of interrelationship, like interpersonal skills within your team. It's for you to deal with them. It's for you to like train people. It's for you to make sure that everybody communicates well within the team, that things don't get lost, things like that. So, and this, I think you get it by just working in a team. Like if you're part of a team, if you're collaborating with others, you're going to learn those skills. So you can definitely pick them up. I don't think there is any specific role you should like learn. Of course, you could have more or less processes, more or less practices, but really the core of the matter is like you have to listen to the others and like figure out how to make them work together. And then, like, again, if you want to think about what the process should be and what would work in your given circumstances. And I think the last thing is also a business aspect. Um, I think it's better if you have an idea about where the business needs to go, wants to go, and understand those constraints. Because you're also the main advisor to the CEO or the head of growth or whoever as to where we should go next. Or like, is it possible to go there next? Like, when we started Canoa, we've had this idea of embedding AI like in multiple parts of the platform, and like, as exciting as this sound, I also know very well that this is extremely costly if you want to do it right, because you need to gather your own data set, you need to have a bunch of data scientists, you need to have people that are expensive. And so, I've always been trying to thread a line between, we want to have this application, but also like we need to be aware that if we want to go all the way in like this or that technology, it's going to be really expensive. And so, like, how do we do it with the money we have? And that's when like these two things sort of match together. Like, you want to explore this specific business avenue by deploying a new technology, but at the same time, you cannot do it the same way as a traditional company does it. So how do you do it? And that's where like having a bit of business exposure and interest allows you to go beyond, because you could say, look, we can't do it, it's not possible, another story. That could be your advice, because you don't feel comfortable with going that direction. It's too much money, it's too hard, it's too expensive. All the problems that could happen, um, and so you don't want to go there, too risky. Or you understand the business, you understand it's critical, you go this direction, you understand it makes sense, and then that, at least for me, it allows me to go beyond my potential initial resistance and things like that, and like try to go beyond what you think is possible, and push a bit of creativity around the technical aspect.
I see.
So yeah, three aspects: like good technically, good manager, but also understand a bit of a business and what the company is trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Any tips from your experience on hiring or finding good talent in AC?
Yeah, I mean, the main one is to find a builder or find builders. You want to bias people at like at least for startups. Again, it's specific to startups, right? Um, the team, the context of a team is that people have to be quite autonomous, um, especially in early days. They want to have some level of understanding of a product and the UX, and so like I've always biased strong builders, like people that demonstrated that they can build something, um, versus somebody that comes with um, a lot of experience in bigger companies or bigger organizations where like I I wasn't necessarily thinking about was in the Stearns initiative, but then after having been for a few rounds, I sort of started to bias more of a builder. The challenge that happen when you hire people from larger organization, is that they've been evolving in very sometimes rigid systems, where like a lot of things are done for them by another team, or like their scope is actually quite narrow compared to the scope we're dealing with, or they should be dealing with in their new role. So when in their previous roles where we're looking at a tech stack that was like only a small portion of the whole app, in the new role they most likely are looking at like half of the tech stack of the whole app.
Mm,
Like suddenly it's a lot more than they dealt with before. Processes are a lot more fluid in our startups. The speed is much higher than what you expect in larger organizations. So like it can be hard. I found that it could be hard for people coming from larger teams to adapt, um, unless again they demonstrate that they are builders, that they are passionate, that just that they example of things out there that they've built. Then there is no reason why they couldn't replicate the sort of things with you. So yeah, I've always tried to bias builders and people with a product like intuition, again because I don't want everything to be scoped out. Like I don't want every single like interaction to be scoped out. Otherwise, it's too much work for the product team. It's too many. It's too many like possibilities for getting it wrong. Um, and so yeah, trying to find builders with like some sort of product and UX intuition would be my recommendation, or at least what works for us. Um, I think Linear has got a similar philosophy where they hire product engineers. I don't know how they call them, but like the teams are very autonomous, and the engineers have a lot of product responsibility. And you can only do this with people that have a right like interest and mindset. It doesn't work for everyone. Some people are not necessarily interested in product. Uh, they want to build good tech, but not necessarily like worry about the interaction or the user journey and things like that. So
yes. I'm curious to know, do you have any like systems in play to make the coding process and productive? Like after Cursor, I would literally seen the productivity growth. Like I was using Claude and ChatGPT, but having migrating to Cursor. So on those lines, what are like some?
yeah, I use Claude a lot for things when I have no idea. Often, um, I used it also to work. Like I was working on a new functionality for which I had to build a new data model for a database, or like a new whole. Like it was a bit of a large thing, and I asked it to run through scenarios of like different, how different like data would be able to be ingested in this specific data model. What are the trade-offs? What are the pros and cons? And this was super helpful. And even on more technical things, like I don't know how to do a specific thing in JavaScript or in Python, I can just ask, and usually the answer is amazing. So that's definitely part of my maybe once or twice a day. And then I use Visual Studio Code with all the auto completion. Um, like this is now part of my routine. Um, I use more and more of a in editor
Mm.
asking, like want to write a function. I'm not too sure how to go about it, and I just start by saying, "Hey, write me a function that does this or that." We do a lot of geometry here, and geometry is always tricky, like getting the transforms right, and like it's always a bit of a mental effort. And for this, like all of the, I found that all of the AI and generative tools are amazing. They make my whole life faster. Like you know, whenever I have an issue, like I wanted to do a mirror transform, I'm like, can you write a mirror transform for me? Yeah, sure. And then it spits out.
Nice.
It's probably 10 lines and it's fine. And when you read it, it makes total sense. You understand that it's moving the object to the origin, making a scale of -1, which flips it, and then moving back the object to where it was. And like that's probably what you would have done by thinking about it a bit more. But it removes this mental load, and you can think a bit about the higher system and some sort of higher level problems that you might have. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so not very exotic, but it's definitely taking more and more space on in my day to day coding life.
I see. And one thing I really, so I read a blog from Federico on the schema you have of like product variants, uh, and I was like, for your tool, there must have been like architecture decisions on like, how is it? Do you want to go the beam route or like make it lightweight and stuff? So how do you decide like the schema, methods, and everything when you were building?
Yeah, so like we're targeting interior architect,
Hmm.
and they for them products and furniture are much more important than walls and beams. And we know that it's hard to build a beam like a fully beam model with all the rules it has and so on. And so we wanted to keep the tool as lightweight as possible. So we kind of put a cross on that and stick with a very lightweight geometry schema that allows us to represent curves and arcs and those basic 2D shapes. And then the real layer of semantic, like real thing that have more meaning than is just a geometry, are products. And like we sort of have these two things. Like it's either well, we have a bit more, but like it's either some base geometry or it's a product. And then for products, that's where we do the work. Like we know it's a product, we know it has a category, like it's a chair or a table or something like that. It often has a color, a finish, a fabric. It has a vendor, a material, and we made the decision to go to like have a richer experience on that front because the benefit, like it has pros and cons. The benefit is that we can solve our users' problems, which is that they want to have access to good data about products faster. The downside is that it's harder to work with products. Like it's not as simple as just dumping an image, right? Because then you're missing a category, you're missing a color, you're missing a price, and then it's not that useful anymore. So yeah, that's really the only big constraint we added to the system, like as in terms of like semantic or beam constraint. Um, Beyond that, it's just images and curves. Um, you know, we kept it relatively simple, just so that just to lower the curve to entry. And we don't feel like some of these things are unnecessary for our users today. Um, yeah, so if we can avoid having too much complexity and make the entry point like lower, then it's just a win for us.
I see. I have a rapid fire round to wrap up the interview. So we'll get 5 to 10 seconds to answer it, and you gotta keep it super brief.
Okay.
All right. Uh, what's your favorite movie?
Oh my God, Orange Clockwork.
Any book which made a big impact in your life?
The Ministry of the Future,
A city in your travel bucket list?
man. Florence in Italy.
Your role model.
Oh my god. You're killing me. Um, uh, Marc-André Leclerc.
I see. Three words your friends would describe you.
Um, I don't know. Can we go next?
uh, okay, I had a question in mind. Best piece of advice you have received till date.
Best piece of advice. Um, so, best piece of advice. Yeah,
You can't skip this
work,
one.
Yeah, I think about one. Work harder.
See,
Like I've, I tell you why. I've been always quite fast at solving things. But the downside is that I'm not necessarily thorough. And somebody like in one specific context sort of gave me this, well, asked me to be more thorough in a not so nice way.
mhm,
And so the piece of advice is like, yeah, if you're if you're talented at something, like work even harder, and it's going to come out even better.
I see.
Thanks.
Alma, I see. Uh, what's a piece of like person you recommend or you follow or a podcast you listen where you get good source of content?
I listened to the Lex Freeman podcast for some time. I don't listen like every day, but like once in a while, I kind of tune in and listen to one of his long version interviews. I I follow a few people in the like JavaScript community, local first community. You know, people trying to build software that run like are multiplayer by nature and multi-user, which I find quite interesting. Um, I the issue is that I'm really bad with names, so I never remember the names of people. And then I have a few like sort of tech blog or tech people that I follow around more of a Python community. I listened to this one from a founder of Django, who is now playing a lot. I think it's Simon something. I find his name. Simon Willison. He, he gave a podcast, a 1 hour long podcast on the pragmatic engineer mailing
Mm,
list, which is actually one of the mailing lists I read from time to time. Um, one of the newsletter, and he did this podcast about where he's talking about how he's using AI in his practice. Like he's been an early adopter and he's used AI for coding for like quite some time, and it's a very interesting interview. I found so Simon Willison on the pragmatic engineer is a good listen in my mind. Um, yeah, pragmatic engineer is definitely a resource, but it's pretty good. Um, and then I have a bunch of AI newsletters, but it's a bit on and off.
I see. Any hot takes on Gen AI? What are some use cases or applications you're excited?
I have a I think the reality of it is that it's hard. Like it's hard to use it.
Mm,
So it's easy to make demos, but to use it for real, it's like any tool. I've used it for more than a year in my coding practice, and I still don't feel like I use it very well. Like it's not, you know, I I've had to adapt a lot, like or adjust or like be creative with my way of thinking. Um, and so I think it's definitely exciting to see it like become more and more prevalent and prominent, and like more and more people use it. But I don't think I have a hard time imagining where it's going to have like a real major impact on our society, apart from writing an email, which I'm not sure it's something that I care too much about. Like I'm still okay writing my own emails. So I think we'll probably see some fundamental transformations coming, but I don't think they are there yet. Um,
Interesting. Anything which we didn't cover in this interview, and you would like to end on that note?
yeah, um, yeah, we like. I think I'd like to talk about the team at Canoa because it's been a very diverse and fun team, and that's why I joined in the first place. And like we've always had a mix of different different people, like people coming from interior architecture, pure architects, pure software engineers. We've had people from overseas, um, and it's been a very interesting journey to be in a really diverse team from many aspects. It's not easy every day because you don't necessarily have a direct communication or direct link that you could have with somebody that is very similar to you. Uh, but I think I find it more exciting on the long term. Like it's more nourishing um, than having people that you're very like in sync with. Um, like you're not going to move or like I don't think you as an individual are going to develop as much as if you're working with people that are coming from a lot of diverse background, which was also the case when I was at Bureau Happold. We had a lot of people with really diverse like backgrounds and interests. The only common point was buildings and passion for buildings, but that was pretty much it. Like beyond that, some people were like fascinated about MEP systems, others were all about like sustainability and so on. And you of course had all the structural engineers that were passionate about structures and things like that. So it was a big mix, but at the end of the day, like having all those things come together is what keeps you moving.
That's amazing. That's such a sweet note to end the interview. Thanks a lot, Nicholas, for being on the show.